Tuesday, the world witnessed the violent death of Ahmaud Arbery, who was killed on February 23rd while taking a jog in Brunswick, Georgia, his neighborhood. And then yesterday, a 21-year-old black man named Dreeson John Reed was shot by police while his last moments streamed over Facebook Live in Indianapolis, Indiana.
According to the Indianapolis Star, Reed was driving up to 90 miles per hour when police began chasing him. However, police say they stopped their pursuit because the speeds could endanger others. But when an officer saw Reed's car driving later and got out of the police cruiser, that's supposedly when Reed got out and began running. Today, Indianapolis Police Chief addressed the fatal shooting.
Last night was a difficult night for our entire community, filled with tragedy. When even one life is lost in our city, it's one too many. I don't have words this morning that will heal the wounds left behind by last night. I won't even try. I know that too many in the community say talk is cheap. Actions speak louder than words. So that is my commitment to the city. It is my commitment to the mayor this morning. We will act. We will act with transparency. We will act with fairness. We will act with compassion. We will act to live out the oath that we all swore to protect and serve Indianapolis.
The shooting sparked a peaceful demonstration of about 100 people at the scene of the shooting Wednesday night.
And joining us now to discuss the situation, our chief legal analyst, Dr. Laura McNeal.
Hi, Dr. McNeal. This video footage is certainly troubling. Do you think it will impact this particular case?
I think it will. What it does is it helps establish that Sean Reed was not posing any immediate bodily harm or threat to the officer, because in the video it appears that he's running away as opposed to running towards the officer. In addition, it shows, it begs the question rather in terms of whether or not there was excessive use of force. We see in the video at some point in time his phone goes to a blue sky, which indicates or suggests that he was down at that point, and yet you still have a number of shots that ring out after you see that blue sky for an extended amount of time, which suggests that perhaps he was still being shot and the use of deadly force was occurring after he was already down.
And we do have some conflicting reports from the police saying that maybe the young man returned fire and maybe he didn't. We don't know. Unfortunately, we've seen, though, too many of these shootings of black men by white police officers. This police officer was black, reportedly. Does that change how this case is going to be viewed?
I don't think so. I think what it does is it shows just how systemic implicit and explicit biases are. I had the opportunity to conduct implicit bias training and cultural sensitivity training for police officers through my position at Harvard. And what we learned is that black police officers have the same level of bias as white police officers. These biases that black men have a high propensity for violence, that they should be in fear of them, are stemming from the stereotypes we're constantly being bombarded with within our communities, through the media, through the movies. And when they're out in the field making these split-second decisions, those biases take precedence.
Interesting thoughts, Dr. McNeal, and I do just want to reiterate what Fred said, that allegedly we're still getting reports in about the officer who did the shooting being a black man as well. Race does factor in here, though, when we are talking about this, because we've been talking about the outrage of the racist part of the police officers, and I know you've done the training and so forth. How would this factor in terms of training if it indeed was in fact confirmed to be a black officer shooting a black man?
What is important is what we found with this type of racial sensitivity training or racial bias training is that knowledge is power. Once police officers are aware that they harbor these biases, they tend to self-correct. No one wants to look like a racist, right? And so it's also very helpful in helping police departments weed out officers that should not be out in the field if they do harbor some racial biases towards African Americans or any other minority communities. But what's so important is that we acknowledge the biases there and make sure the police officers have the correct training to either manage the bias or have them removed from those positions.
And if you can, Doctor, walk us through the investigation process typically for an officer-involved shooting. What are the steps once the incident occurs?
Absolutely, Fred. So essentially what will happen is the officers will do an initial investigation at the crime scene. So what this involves is, were there any witnesses, collecting evidence? They'll look at how many shell casings there were from the shots that were fired. Where was the positioning of the shots? They'll also have a report from the coroner's office in terms of, was Sean Reed shot in the back? Was he shot in the front? Again, that helps put the pieces of the puzzle together in terms of what happened that led to the untimely death of this young man. And then eventually they'll take all of that evidence, they'll present it to the prosecuting attorney in that area, and he will decide if there's enough evidence to present it to a grand jury for a possible indictment.
So if there was an indictment, the case moved forward, would race factor into this if indeed it was a black officer shooting an unarmed black man?
The only reason that race would factor in is you're trying to say that there was intentional racial discrimination, like bring a claim under the Civil Rights Act, then yes, it would factor in. But if you're bringing a claim simply related to excessive use of force, which is what appears to be based on the evidence we've seen thus far, and I do want to emphasize it is preliminary evidence, then race would not matter in terms of the excessive use of force.
And back to your bias teaching and training, you mentioned that you did that work at Harvard. Did you find that black police officers maybe try to do a little more, a little extra to prove that they are not biased?
I would say no. We have them take what is called an IAT, an implicit association test, and what that does is it measures your level of bias, and it's very hard to beat that test, and so it's not something you can fake per se. And again, the purpose of the test is just to help them recognize that those biases are there so that they can think about how it impacts their actions out in the field.
And just one final question real quick. One case was in Georgia, the other case we are looking at Sean Reed, that case
Indianapolis.
In Indianapolis, that's correct, thank you. Will there be a difference based on where these took place, the laws in those states?
No, I don't think so. Really what the big difference is, or contrast between those two cases, the one in Brunswick, Georgia involved two residents that were trying to make a citizen's arrest. They weren't police officers, and so that's a different set of laws that would apply. Whereas the one that happened in Indianapolis with Sean Reed, that's a different situation because the question is whether or not police officers were using an excessive use of force. And so the laws tend to be very standard with respect to that, but it's looking at two different bodies of law. Again, one is a police officer shooting, the other one is a citizen shooting another citizen.
Great, thank you for clarifying that.
And thank you for joining us, Dr. Laura McNeal. We'll sure be revisiting this again very soon, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, thank you.